the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Well, hello, Sublation Media viewers. It's I, Doug Lain, king of Sublation Media. That's all I'm going to say about myself. And with me today...
Ashley Frawley, who... so, I was on...
I'm now the king. Okay, go ahead.
No, it's so hard to pivot because all day I've been on the radio because there's this assisted dying bill that's being debated. Well, it's just been put out, like the full text of it's just been put out today. So I'm trying to like pivot to, and I just posted a clip of one of the interviews that I did. And I was just looking at it on Twitter and you caught me right at the start of the show. Anyways, yeah. It's bad news. It's bad.
We're on the air, Ashley. It's time to put the Twitter aside. We're on the air.
But I think that it's of a piece. I do. I think that this surveillance bureaucracy, the all-inclusive nature of surveillance and bureaucracy from the cradle to the grave, these things I think are all sort of connected. At least they would be in my mind because that's like the core of my work. So I would put things that way. But Doug, you had a kind of a different take on this when I suggested that we talk about surveillance and censorship. And you've given this a title that nobody likes because nobody in the US on the left is interested in censorship. It's a right-wing dog whistle. So tell me, why did you call it that? Right-wing dog whistle, I should say.
Will there be a Trumptastic censorship industrial complex? That's the title of this stream. And have there already been comments against the title, or how do you know that nobody likes it?
Because every time that we do a stream on this, nobody likes it. They don't watch it. They don't watch it. So what can we say right off the bat to tell people, look, this matters? Well, look, Trump is doing it. Now does it matter?
Well, it's very unclear as to what Trump is actually going to do, but there are a number of things which are pending, which if he does nothing about, will mean that the general trend towards surveillance and censorship and information control will continue. But there are some positive signs that actually Trump might change the game a bit, but it's tough to say. You know, you have to read the tea leaves and look at the actual legislation that's coming up for a vote. You have to consider what it has passed already in terms of law, as well as know about what Michael Schellenberger is calling the censorship industrial complex, which was the network of NGOs and deep state agencies like CISA, which is a part of the Department of Homeland Security, that had set up control mechanisms for the internet and for legacy media. So, but before we get to Trump, I want to talk about the Democrats a little bit. Because what the Democrats are doing right now is trying to figure out why they lost. And I watched a little bit of the Jon Stewart podcast where they were discussing why they lost.
Yeah.
And it pointed in the direction that the Democrats are going to try to go in terms of censorship and control, I believe. So I'm going to run that clip here. Here it is.
It's important to recognize that the system under which we lived from 1981 to 2021, neoliberalism, the idea that you were going to rely on markets and let all the money go to the top because people at the top would invest more efficiently than if the government got involved either through regulation or taxes. That system, Joe Biden very deliberately deconstructed and replaced with the system we had had before that did work for everybody. He invested in ordinary Americans. He stood for unions. He used the FTC to break up monopolies and to get rid of junk fees and to try and make it easier for people to start businesses. All the things that should have made ordinary Americans say, hey, yeah, this is pretty good. We had inflation, but wages went up faster than inflation. And yeah, eggs were more expensive, but that's because there was a bird flu. And then there was price gouging. All of these things that people like you and me tried to get out there, but that is not what voters heard, what they heard is eggs are more expensive, products are more expensive, it's Joe Biden's fault, instead of the people who had really ruled from 1981 to 2021. And instead, what have they done? They have elected somebody who has vowed to put those old things back into place.
Right.
And make their lives more expensive, and then turn around and blame what they call the liberals, who they think are responsible for the cost of things because of their policies and because they have been welcoming to immigrants who also are important to our economy.
Heather, you brought up a really interesting point, which is people are voting to return to a system that they seem to be rejecting. But what was so interesting to me, when you talked about neoliberalism and supply side, the Democrats have embraced that in similar ways. I mean, Clinton famously deregulated financial institutions, which you could point to as the 2008 crisis genesis. I don't know what you just described to me about the economic policies of the Biden administration is the first time I heard it framed that way.
Which is just killing me, because while what you're saying is exactly true, after the Reagan Revolution, the Democrats made a decision that they were going to try and go after the Reagan voters. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, they did purge from their ranks all of the people who were arguing to go back to the sort of liberal consensus of the period after World War II. But Biden has been, every day he's been out there saying, this is exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And, literally, he's even comparing some of his policies to those of FDR. And it just never cracked into the media. There was somebody who was out there yesterday saying, an economics reporter that I won't name, saying, people want to get rid of neoliberalism. And I'm like, we did. We did. And nobody knows it. And you voted to go back to it. And instead of going back to neoliberalism, what we're going to go to is autocracy, which is a different thing.
Right.
Because it will not be governed by the rule of law. It will be governed by cronyism and the kind of corruption that we've seen in other autocracies. That's not what people think they're voting for. They think they're voting for the ideas that Biden embraced, investing in the middle class, investing in creating a new economy. And in fact, they've just voted that away in favor of a system of autocracy.
Heather, I almost would go you one further and say it's almost a rejection of Biden's economic policy, in the sense that the consensus in the media was that caused the inflation. I can't tell you how many times I've heard, it was just that last bit of stimulus that kept people in their houses and fed, that made it so that the inflation is so unbearable now. In no way reckoning with the complexity of inflation or the complexity of our economy. And in some ways, I think locking in that feeling that if you stimulate the economy on the demand side, you will necessarily drive inflation.
Yeah, and that's actually the way it was portrayed. But I think you're making a bigger point, and that is what this rejection of the Biden economic plan has shown to future politicians is that there is no upside in trying to invest in ordinary Americans, that you will not get rewarded for it. So there's no reason to do that. And that's a really big lesson that is, I think, going to end up really coming back to bite the people who have voted for it. You've just said to any future politicians, do not bother actually to try and do things for the middle class, because they won't appreciate it. Instead, you should go ahead and simply continue to, to pervert their information base so that they think you're doing something even though you're not.
Right.
Okay, so that was a clip from the Jon Stewart podcast. I don't remember the name of the podcast, but there were a number of things that were said in that piece. One thing I want to point out is that the major thing that was claimed was that the reason Trump won was because the voters were lied to. They were living in an alternative reality. They were inundated with disinformation, and so forth. Just as one detail from that, I think I heard her say that I think it wasn't actually in the clip I showed, but maybe it was, but it was about how Trump visited a black-owned barber shop, and that the barber later complained. I don't think it was in the clip, but I saw it in another part of the podcast, and that he didn't know that he was going to be used for the campaign. The owner of the barbershop said. In fact, there were two visits, one by phone and in June, and one in person in October. Jon Stewart was talking about the visit in October, and she referred to the visit in June. The visit in June was by phone. It was actually not a campaign event. It was a meeting of small business owners in Georgia, and Trump kind of called in and turned it into a campaign event. Later on, there was an actual campaign event. The two things were conflated. It amounts to misdirection. But more importantly than that little detail is the fact that she stated that wages outpaced inflation during Biden's administration. And technically, if you just say it that way, that wages outpaced inflation during Biden's administration, it's true. For a few months, from August until now, wages have begun to outpace inflation. From 2021 until 2023, inflation consistently outpaced wages. So, it is more untrue than true to say that wages outpaced inflation. The question of Biden's record, the claim that he was reinventing the Cold War FDR welfare state consensus, is clearly overblown. But it does point to the fact that the ways in which Biden did try to help workers were basically bureaucratic. They amounted to some infrastructure spending and to a few changes in the NLRB, which didn't have a dramatic impact on the majority of workers in America, but was kind of red meat for the labor constituency within the Democratic Party. To take away from this election that there's no point in trying to help middle class people because they won't be grateful, and because they're all stuck in the disinformation, virtual reality, is to me extremely wrong-headed, kind of authoritarian, elitist, and disturbing. But it's not any worse than what I would expect from this Democratic Party. Anyway, we should just all be reminded of where we're at. What the people who were in power were these people, and this is how they think, and this is what they can tell themselves and believe. But nonetheless, we are at a moment now where Trump is in power, and we're no longer contending with the Democrats as the primary enemies of the working class, but now have a new set of enemies, and a new task. Anyway, I'll let you intervene here, Ashley.
Right. So I'm gonna say something here. I may have said this before. I wrote it in a recent piece for Compact, and it's I don't want to be too pessimistic. So I very much welcome pushback here. But when you said, she says, oh, there's no point because helping the middle class because they'll just be ungrateful. On the one hand, it's like, yeah, that's just these sorts of people, right? They want to be philanthropists. They want to be recognized as good people and helping out. That's core to their identity. It's often core to their jobs. So that's they're in the social problems class, right? And they are looking down on people, and they're surprised and worried that the lower orders don't see them with the deference they think that they deserve. So maybe that's too mean. But the other thing is that here's the pessimistic bit. I sometimes think, well, we are so limited in terms of what we can do within the major parties in terms of actually making people's lives better. There's the investment is going to go where labor is cheapest. It's gone essentially. She made the comment like it's not profitable to invest in I don't know what she said, the middle class or something like that. I don't think that's what she meant, but that's the truth. And this idea of everyone sort of coming in and saying, oh, my leader is the one who did this economic thing, as though they're just like puppet masters. You know, they can change the economy at will. They can make your life better if they want to, but they just don't really want to. Or like the whole economic growth discussion, as though they're sort of like, well, would you even need economic growth? As though it's like, well, we'll have some economic growth tomorrow, maybe a little bit less, maybe a little bit more, maybe we'll have lots of economic growth. Won't that be great? Like they can do whatever they want. They can't. They're very, very limited in what they can do. And I feel like that's too pessimistic. You know, there are things that we can do to make life better, but I think what's happening now is we're seeing this enormous transition or fissure that's developing, and this is what I wrote about in Compact, where you have this educated social problems class that you have what used to be the working class is shuffles in and out of this welfare holding cell, while the educated people are jostling to get the keys. You know, they want, you know, a prison needs a psychologist, a prison needs a warden. You know, this is the situation that we're in now. You have this class of people that needs to be contained, and you have a class of people who are desperate to put themselves forward as the ones who will do the containment. And all of it happens through this philanthropic, paternalistic guise of caring. But the moment you get uppity, the mask slips. You know, it's like maybe the jail warden is your friend until you break a rule, and then he's going to beat you, you know? And I just saw like, that's probably way too pessimistic, but that's what I see developing in society. This extremely uneasy equilibrium, I want to say. It's not, though, obviously. It's a struggle, obviously. This uneasy tension between these people who are identify problems, discover new problems every day, promise their specific brand of solutions, promise to be part of the solution, which is never really a solution. It's always a form of containment. And the people who are down at the bottom who don't want to be contained. And I don't see a way out of that except an extraordinary break with the way things are.
Well, I think that we are turning away from neoliberalism. One thing that this historian said that I think is true is that in a way, Biden was working on ending the neoliberal order. And Trump is going to continue in that direction. Some of the things he said, I watched him on Joe Rogan, where he described how he was going to onshore manufacturing again using tariffs. Whether or not what he said is literally the case, that he's just going to use tariffs and get rid of the income tax and get rid of the kinds of incentives that were built into the tax code and in other ways through the Biden administration, and simply just impose tariffs in such a draconian way that the companies that had built manufacturing plants overseas will be forced to come home again, because it will be cheaper to work with American labor and to produce in the United States than it would be to try to use exports from other countries in the United States. Whatever is literally going to happen with those policies, it's clear to me that the aim right now is to onshore manufacturing, is to spur on growth, is to revitalize the American economy.
They'll try that. They'll try that, sure. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing is this is what Coutron says.
Right. Yeah. Along with that, they will be undermining the apparatus within the state that has been working to try to achieve some peace between the classes. So there probably will be many ways in which the NLRB will be undermined. And I don't know what will happen to unionized labor or for public employees under Trump, but I don't think it will be easier for them in the coming years. And I do expect that, to the degree to which we don't just get a big boom where there's plenty of money and goods being manufactured in the United States to to the degree to which there are rough waters, they will all be felt by the working class.
Yeah.
So that leaves us in a position not of backing Trump's policies around labor or even tariffs or anything like that, but really just to see where the needs are as socialists to try to organize independently of the Democrats and Republicans to meet the needs that are arising in this changing moment.
All right, I'm going to have to go into that in a minute. But there are two things that so hold on, meet needs. I think that's low horizons. All right, so I'll come back to that. Okay. There were two things. Someone said in the comments, what are you talking about a welfare holding cell? Welfare is at a historic, what is it now? Public assistance has been low since the 1990s. Yeah, this is why I said shuffling in and out of a welfare holding cell. And in the article, I put it something like shrinking entitlements. Because the reality is, like, it's not enough even in the slightest. You know, people are, it's a horrible situation. People are working several jobs, particularly women, because employers are hiring more part-time workers to get around having to pay benefits. So what happens is you work 3 part-time jobs and you still don't make a living wage. But then if you tip yourself over, you don't get the same welfare entitlements, and the welfare entitlements are so spread out and all over the place, and you have to have like a PhD to figure out what the heck you can even get, and if you can get it, and it gets cut all the time. It's horrible. It's a horrible situation, and it's also very costly in terms of administration. It's fully ideological because it, like, a lot of universal benefits are cheaper, even though people, oh, it's wasted on people who don't need them. Yeah, but the administrative burden is so small that it saves a lot of money just on that. But they have so many, like, you know, everything is means tested in the US because it's pure ideology. So it's this, people have to jump through all these hoops. It's horrible. And it's horrible on purpose. It's horrible on purpose. So that people are always forced into these really crappy jobs, and they get kicked out of these jobs, and they're searching for these entitlements, and then they never make it out, right? They're constantly just treading water. That's the situation, and that is on purpose, because people wouldn't work a lot of these crap jobs if they weren't forced on pain of starvation to do so. And that's where a lot of dwindling growth has been chased, is in crap jobs in the service sector. Same with Europe, same sort of thing happening here. And it's often women that bear the brunt of that because they've got kids. So they're trying to, and that's why they don't give them childcare, even though you'd think it would make sense to allow the woman to go to work. But no, not giving childcare forces the woman to work antisocial hours around the childcare. So women will work night shifts and then they'll take care of their kids during the day. It's crazy. Anyway, so the other thing is, you mentioned that things are not going to get any easier for even, I can't remember the phrase you used, state workers, something like that. Yeah, I'm not saying that the people,
public employees.
Yeah, public employees. I'm not saying the people in the social problems class have it good. They don't. They're also in precarious positions, which is why they're pissed off and they're angry, and they desperately also, there is such a tendency amongst these sorts of people to virtue signal, because they are so desperate to say, I am not down there. I am on my way up. I am on my way up. I am not among the great unwashed. Look, I've got my pronouns in my bio. Hello, that means I'm middle class. Can't you tell? You know, and I've got, I know somebody, this is so mean. I hope she doesn't watch. I know somebody who was, you know, she's a nice person, but she's not intellectual in the slightest, which is totally fine. Love my non-intellectual friends, but she's got her pronouns all over everything. And I know that she has not read Judith Butler or something like that, but she is one of these sort of precarious professionals. She's constantly getting tossed out. She's constantly getting spat out, and her life is very precarious. And she's just desperately clinging to this possibly maybe professional position in society, even though she has a low income as well. And she's constantly on the verge of getting kicked out of her accommodation, you know, but she's like saying, no, but I deserve this. Don't toss me down. For the love of God, don't toss me down. Look, I'm going to say all the right things. I'm going to signal the fact that I belong. I should be the manager. I am not to be managed. Okay. And then, so those are the two things that I wanted to say just about the sort of questioning of what I had said before. But also on this sort of like, oh, what does the working class need and how can we meet those needs? I'm sorry, but that's falling into the same trap. In spite of the fact that people are in awful precarious positions, we are in a world, in a moment, we have been for 150, 170 years, where our society is pregnant with a new society. And every single person is aware, but constantly told through whatever discourse possible, it's not true. But everyone is aware that the possibilities available to us are much broader than what we're actually able to experience. We all know that. Everyone is aware of that. We on the one hand, we talk about us being on the brink of starvation. On the other hand, we throw out shitloads of food and we talk about the problem of waste in society and overconsumption, all this sort of thing. How do we live in this world? Right? That's how do you have poverty amid great wealth? We all know that a better world is completely possible. We just haven't figured it out yet. And I think people want bigger dreams, and they have bigger dreams. And you said this yourself when we did the election stream. You said everybody knows that, and I've quoted you on this several times in the media since then. I didn't quote you directly. I should have said. I said my friend from America. I should have said Doug Lain.
Douglas Lain, author of
head
Fast
honcho.
Revolution and king of Sublation Media. Go ahead.
I was under pressure. You get 3 minutes to make your point. Anyways,
I understand.
But I was quoting you, and I said, what you said, which was, everybody knows that politicians lie. But the question was, whose lies did you want to believe? Whose lies did you want to believe? Did you want to believe? Americans didn't believe.
You're quoting me, quoting Chris Catrone is actually what you're doing.
Was it because you said it to Chris Catrone?
No, Chris Catrone said it to me, and I probably repeated it back to him. But he's been saying it for a while that he's talking about lies.
Good thing I just said my friend from America. Then could be either of you.
Right. Yeah, right.
Okay, so both of you were saying this, and I thought it was a great point. People didn't believe that we were going to have fascism tomorrow. But what do you want to believe? You want to believe that we can have the stars, that the solar system's not an obstacle, that we're going to have a golden age. We know that is possible. And we've had a politics of low expectations for such a long time that it's become endemic to the left, where it's just like, oh, well, what's our basic needs? And to the point where we turn it into a virtue. Oh, you don't really need that. You don't really, as though the only thing you need is to live like a badly fed animal. This guy's not even badly fed. He's very fat.
Okay, well, let me just say
you should decline to live like that, as Oscar Wilde said. You should decline to live like that. You should demand to be seated at the board.
There's a way in which in the vision of, the original bourgeois vision for society was that not only would everyone get their basic needs met, but they would be involved in and in control of and directing the way their basic needs were met, the way in which they produced in the world, the way in which what was produced socially would be distributed. Not
basic needs. We know that's a BS thing, because basic needs change. Needs are historical, needs are social.
The idea was that they would be independent and self-directed and self-responsible, and their abilities and aims would grow and move beyond where they started. What comes to mind is how Abraham Lincoln said that wage labor is fine for a time when you're young and you're learning a trade, but it should not be the final destination for anyone in American society to be a wage laborer. So the dream of the entrepreneurial dream is actually a dream of being self-directed, self-responsible, your own boss, etc., which is much closer to being aligned with the actual vision of socialism than this idea that there's going to be a permanent working class which will be managed and taken care of by the state and will be constrained or allowed to do some free range kind of activity based on what's necessary for the capitalist state and capitalist society in any given moment. No, the aim of the working class is to be independent, self-reliant, self-directed, in control, powerful. And so when I say we need to help develop working class institutions to meet needs, I mean independently, not through turning to the welfare state, but rather in a self-organized way. So that independence is itself the same kind of Um, it's dreaming big in the same way that dreaming about going to the stars would be. Maybe even more so, because
So
going to the
say it in the
stars.
slogan. Even just bring
Yeah.
in needs signals like, oh, we're going to meet our needs. What are our needs? What are our needs? Our needs are the moon and the stars. Like our needs are, whatever is possible at a given historical moment. That's what a human being needs. So yes, I mean, technically, yeah, we want to meet our needs in the sense that needs will always be expanding, and we want them to expand. We want to progress as humanity. We don't want to be stuck in this endless reproduction of our existence, which is completely unnecessary. Spending so much of your time in drudgery just to reproduce yourself. But to sort of frame it into, I don't know, it's a state. I know I'm being pedantic.
No, it's fair. No, it's fair. No, I mean, you're right. When the danger here is whenever you try to express what's needed, it will get transformed and twisted around into what already is, into some sort of ready-made approach.
Yeah.
To politics. I want to show another clip, and because I know you have a lot on your mind when it comes to the theme of this podcast, which is surveillance, and this has to do with surveillance and with trying to understand and relate to Trump. So here's Trump on free speech.
If we don't have free speech, then we just don't have a free country. It's as simple as that. If this most fundamental right is allowed to perish, then the rest of our rights and liberties will topple just like dominoes, one by one. They'll go down. That's why today I'm announcing my plan to shatter the left-wing censorship regime and to reclaim the right to free speech for all Americans. And reclaim is a very important word in this case because they've taken it away. In recent weeks, bombshell reports have confirmed that a sinister group of deep state bureaucrats, Silicon Valley tyrants, left-wing activists, and depraved corporate news media have been conspiring to manipulate and silence the American people. They have collaborated to suppress vital information on everything from elections to public health. The censorship cartel must be dismantled and destroyed, and it must happen immediately. And here's my plan. First, within hours of my inauguration, I will sign an executive order banning any federal department or agency from colluding with any organization, business, or person to censor, limit, categorize, or impede the lawful speech of American citizens. I will then ban federal money from being used to label domestic speech as mis- or disinformation. And I will begin the process of identifying and firing every federal bureaucrat who has engaged in domestic censorship, directly or indirectly, whether they are the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Health, Human Services, the FBI, the DOJ, no matter who they are. Second, I will order the Department of Justice to investigate all parties involved in the new online censorship regime, which is absolutely destructive and terrible, and to aggressively prosecute any and all crimes identified. These include possible violations of federal civil rights law, campaign finance laws, federal election law, securities law, and antitrust laws, the Hatch Act, and a host of other potential criminal, civil, regulatory, and constitutional offenses. To assist in these efforts, I am urging House Republicans to immediately send preservation letters, and we have to do this right now, to the Biden administration, the Biden campaign, and every Silicon Valley tech giant, ordering them not to destroy evidence of censorship. Third, upon my inauguration as president, I will ask Congress to send a bill to my desk revising Section 230 to get big online platforms out of censorship business. From now on, digital platforms should only qualify for immunity protection under Section 230 if they meet high standards of neutrality, transparency, fairness, and non-discrimination. We should require these platforms to increase their efforts to take down unlawful content such as child exploitation, and promoting terrorism while dramatically curtailing their power to arbitrarily restrict lawful speech. Fourth, we need to break up the entire toxic censorship industry that has arisen under the false guise of tackling so-called mis- and disinformation. The federal government should immediately stop funding all nonprofits and academic programs that support this authoritarian project. If any U.S. university is discovered to have engaged in censorship activities or election interferences in the past, such as flagging social media content for removal of blacklisting, those universities should lose federal research dollars and federal student loan support for a period of 5 years and maybe more. We should also enact new laws laying out clear criminal penalties for federal bureaucrats who partner with private entities to do an end run around the Constitution and deprive Americans of their First, Fourth, and Fifth Amendment rights. In other words, deprive them of their vote. And once you lose those elections, and once you lose your borders like we have, you no longer have a country. Furthermore, to confront the problems of major platforms being infiltrated by legions of former deep staters and intelligence officials, there should be a 7-year calling off period before any employee of the FBI, CIA, NSA, DNI, DHS, or DOD is allowed to take a job at a company possessing vast quantities of U.S. user data. Fifth, the time has finally come for Congress to pass a digital Bill of Rights. This should include a right to digital due process. In other words, government officials should need a court order to take down online content, not send information requests such as the FBI was sending to Twitter. Furthermore, when users of big online platforms have their content or accounts removed, throttled, shadow banned, or otherwise restricted, no matter what name they use, they should have the right to be informed that it's happening, the right to a specific explanation of the reason why, and the right to a timely appeal. In addition, all users over the age of 18 should have the right to opt out of content moderation and curation entirely and receive an unmanipulated stream of information if they so choose. The fight for free speech is a matter of victory or death for America and for the survival of Western civilization itself. When I am president, this whole rotten system of censorship and information control will be ripped out of the system at large. There won't be anything left. By restoring free speech, we'll begin to reclaim our democracy and save our nation. Thank you, and God bless America.
All right. So, I can
picture you, Doug. I can picture you. It's a shame it wasn't you standing on top of standing at a podium saying exactly that.
Yeah, I know. Right. That was pretty much everything I would have wanted to hear on that topic. And someone asks here, what censorship cartel? And the answer to that is, briefly, the Department of Homeland Security, along with the Global Engagement Center, set up a network of nonprofits and NGOs. The Department of Homeland Security took all of our communication infrastructure and put it under its jurisdiction in 2017. By 2020, they had this network of nonprofits and NGOs monitoring the internet and setting the terms of moderation for big tech companies and requesting certain users and posts be censored. It ended up being a censorship operation in just one particular by one particular group, the Election Integrity Project, censored millions of posts through suppression and targeting influencers. And this went on in a variety of ways on a variety of topics to try to control the way we understood a variety of political questions. There was a network of control and censorship built up from around 2017 until now. So the cartel is the cartel of nonprofit and NGO organizations that are funded by the federal government, set up by the federal government through agencies like the Department of Homeland Security. Now, all of what he just said is great. I'd love to see it actually happen. That was almost a campaign promise, but it was pretty specific. There are things that remain that are just as threatening to speech as the censorship industrial complex. One of them would be the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act, which was previously called the Restrict Act, which passed last year, and it was a bipartisan bill. It gave the executive, now Donald Trump, the right to just say, you, TikTok, or you, Facebook, or you, Sublation Media, you are involved with foreign actors who are enemies of the United States, and you are spreading foreign enemy propaganda. We're going to just remove your business license. You no longer have the right to operate in the United States. That's what the in essence, in short, that bill empowers the executive to do. Right now, there's legislation coming up called the Stop Terror Financing and Tax Penalties on American Hostages Act, also known as H.R. 9495, and it would grant the Secretary of the Treasury Department the authority to revoke the tax-exempt status of any nonprofit deemed to be a terrorist-supporting organization. That means, that sounds great, fine. Who needs terrorist-supporting organizations to be tax-exempt? But it means that the Treasury Department will be empowered to render judgment on whether or not a given nonprofit has broken the law without any due process. It's already legal to provide material support or resources to designated foreign terrorist organizations, which would include taking their money to do their work for them in the United States. So if giving the Treasury Department the right to just revoke tax-exempt status means without due process, without actually establishing any wrongdoing, organizations which are aligned ideologically with what somebody thinks is a terrorist organization will be at risk of losing their tax-exempt status based on the content of their ideas alone. So there's two ways in which free speech is under threat in the United States, regardless of what happens to these NGOs and this sort of informal censorship apparatus that was set up through the Department of Homeland Security. These are legislated attacks on free speech, and we shouldn't forget about them just because Trump is seemingly doing the right thing when it comes to the informal censorship apparatus that had been set up under the Biden administration.
So essentially, it's no more of this naked censorship. Let's go back to the good old days when censorship was for your own good, to keep you safe against terrorists, not to keep you safe against people who might hurt your feelings. Okay. So it's not, am I mischaracterizing that?
No, it's not about whether or not somebody hurts your feelings. Although if the head of the Treasury Department decides that something that a nonprofit is doing hurts his or her feelings because of their stance on, say, Gaza, that might be enough to get their tax status revoked, or if they're a company, their business license taken.
Yeah. So basically, the way that the left had been using censorship for their own ends for a long time, that is the headline that's being rolled back. And that was, that was a pretty naked form of censorship. And it was a terrible, as we've said many, many times, it was a terrible, terrible misstep and a terrible mistake, because what are you going to fight for? Who's going to fight to protect freedom? These people won't. They'll put that as the headline against you. But if you're going to use coercive reform to get what you want, that is legal changes whose purpose is to change people's minds, as opposed to people's minds have changed, and then we seek to change the law to reflect that. You change laws to change people. If you're going to do that, your enemy's going to do it too. There was an article in The Intercept on the 5th of November that warned people that if Trump won, we would be handing over one of the biggest surveillance apparatuses in the entire world to Donald Trump. And that for a long time, we had been complicit in this. First of all, there was complicity after 9/11, obviously, right? You had a lot of freedoms that were at risk or taken away, ostensibly to protect from terrorism at that time. And then the left did their own brand of that, and the surveillance state began to accumulate. And, these are just the headline ways in which surveillance works that I'm talking about here. There are much subtler forms of control and coercion that exist in society. But we kind of lost our ability to fight against any of these sorts of things because we ourselves don't believe in freedom. And we are, when I say we, I mean people on the left generally, except for us. Everybody watching, all your sublators, we all believe in freedom. That's what we're fighting for. But generally,
Right.
it's a lonely place to be. It's a lonely place to be because we also have brought up our own brand of safety. So and this concerns me a lot because that's always how fascism. Well, I mean, it's like everything goes to Hitler, but like that's also how fascism was justified, right? To keep you safe. You have the military junta in Greece, justified on the basis of keeping people safe from the communist threat. Safety, of course, is the justification always for repression. But we took that on as well. And it's very hard now for anybody across the political spectrum to see beyond safety. We linguistically twist it in a variety of ways. We frame it in different ways. We talk about health. It's for your health. I can't understand anything greater than your health, right? It's complete amnesia for people like Virginia Woolf saying, looking forward to the day when women would no longer be the protected sex and be free to die just as young as men. It's like impossible to imagine. Why would you want to be free to die as young as men? Because exertion in the world. I want to be an acting being. I want a being of act. I want to be a being of action, not motion, to use Kenneth Burke's terms. I want to be an autonomous being capable of exercising my will and taking risks. Now we think of no greater goal beyond the protection from risks that we pose to each other. So the right and the left mirror each other in these very disturbing ways. Now the right's got the upper hand, and it's going to use it to quell the left. And the left, when it has the upper hand, and I use these terms loosely because you all know that I think the actual left side of the political spectrum, going back to the French Revolution, that side has collapsed. What we're really dealing with is the left and right of a conservative, an older sort of conservative order, the obsession with culture and identity and things like that, and difference. Like universalism is gone. And all of these things are symptoms of that collapse, where we all just compete to put forward our different brands of safety, our different brands of controlling the subject. And our different brands of doing it in a naked way, and our different brands of doing it in a clandestine way.
Yeah. What I would just point out is that while it's true that the incoming Trump administration will still have tools of massive censorship and control at its disposal, even if he follows through on everything he just said in that video. Nonetheless, without the direct censorship apparatus functioning in real time, there will be more of an opportunity to oppose these actions going forward. It remains to be seen whether or not this legislation will actually be able to be enacted, because I think both the revised Restrict Act and this act aiming at nonprofits are unconstitutional. And even if the Supreme Court doesn't uphold the rights of the American people, we will still be better off in terms of organizing to meet our own needs, our need for freedom in this case, rather than a free lunch. So overall, while we should be very skeptical and totally reject the idea that Donald Trump and the state is going to come in and bring us to a golden age, and that we need not organize for working class power because Trump's in office. Obviously, that's insane. But we should not just overlook the opportunities that are coming due to the loss of the Democrats in this election, and we should be aware of one thing we should definitely be aware of is the fact that when we hear about what is happening in politics, we're never hearing the unvarnished truth from anyone. It's always a spin, like this woman who spoke earlier, the historian, who said, oh, well, Biden's, in fact, under Biden, wages outpaced inflation. Well, she was lying by telling a very narrow truth, right? And that kind of thing happens all the time. So we're going to have to do our own research and try to communicate as honestly as we can going forward. But I do agree with everything you said, Ashley. Go ahead.
You make sure that you got to top and tail it with that statement. No, okay. The other thing too is I had been reading today. Was it? No, not today. Recently, people saying, well, one good tactic is to take Trump literally, not symbolically, and take him seriously, which we don't do, obviously, because we know that he's just, he's hyperbolic, that sort of thing. It's a very peculiarly American way of speaking. He just is. I speak like this too, a North American way of speaking. I am hyperbolic as well. And I always find British people like, well, what do you mean, like in specifics? I'm like, I obviously don't literally mean that. But it's just a way of speaking that's very exuberant. But people are saying, well, we should take him seriously, and actually be like, well, you promised this, how are you delivering on those promises? I'm sure you've heard that before. And I'm kind of two minds about this because I feel like I don't really want to take him seriously because he's like, we're going to, I don't know, eradicate the blue hairs or whatever. And I'm like, oh no. I'll have to hide in the, like Anne Frank because I had blue hair once. That's a terrible, terrible, terrible joke. Okay. Anyway. So I don't want to take it seriously. I don't want to hold him to that kind of stuff. Right. I want to take it symbolically. And I feel like that's kind of, the symbolic pushback against the surveillance state, I think is important. And the fact that he even speaks to that, even through lies, is important, so you don't want to say like, oh, I don't know. It's always whatever Trump says, you're going to say the opposite, right? But you have to understand that impulse, the impulse behind why he's even saying it, even though he's lying. Why does he feel the impulse that he needs to lie? Because he knows people are sick of being watched, and you don't want to sort of counter with your own coddling forms of surveillance yourself as though it's a good thing. You have to recognize that we cannot stay in this precarious situation forever. This tenuous hold on an angry working class is gonna break. It's not gonna, I'm thinking of trying to put this correctly, but you understand what I'm trying to say. And I feel like that some of the symbolic thrust of what Trump says is right. It's the right impulse. It's the right impulse to have. And part of it is because he's just branding in his little Trump way grievances that are otherwise not finding a political outlet. And that I think is an important lesson.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's lots of other things we're going to have to talk about and try to think about as clearly as we can that Trump is doing even before he gets into office, right? Even before he's inaugurated. For instance, his announcement that he's going to perhaps get rid of the Department of Education. And the kinds of hyper-partisan language he's using to describe trying to change and improve the university system. All of it needs to be taken slowly and not completely literally, but at the same time critically. I want to next week talk about just the history of the Department of Education. What does it actually do? What would it mean for it to be eliminated?
Actually, working class communities had historically fought against state education because the state stepped in they realized that people were organizing their own education. Working class people were organizing their own forms of education for their children, and the state stepped in because of that could potentially be a volatile situation. There's a long history of working class opposition to state education, which is interesting.
Yeah, and in the United States, the Department of Education does not set the curriculum for schools. That is done at a state-by-state level. So what the Department of Education actually does is, a little bit more nuanced than actually controlling education in the country. It does a variety of things to protecting people's civil rights in schools and a variety of other things. But the point here is that there are a lot of kind of knee-jerk reactions to what's in the news. There's ready-made positions that leftists are supposed to have, which need to be cross-examined, not so that we can get on board the Trump train, but so that we can develop an independent political movement that is actually thinking for itself.
Of course.
Yeah. So
that's the thing. Whenever you say anything like this, people are like, "Oh, you guys are Trump supporters." It's just sort of standing back and observing. Definitely not supporting Trump. I've got just a touch of Trump derangement syndrome myself, I must say.
Do you?
I do. Every now and then I swing back and forth between like, maybe this guy is just dumb enough to attempt bourgeois solutions, to like, this guy is just dumb enough to like start a war. Because
I think both things are absolutely true, Ashley. I think he's just dumb enough to accidentally start a war with, say, Iran, and that could very well happen. And at the same time, he's dumb enough to try, his ham-fisted bourgeois, let's cut a deal approach to politics. And it's very
dumb enough to start a war by doing so. You never
exactly.
There might be a reason why people are pussyfooting around it.
There's no guarantees here at all, and I'm not convinced that peace through strength under Trump is going to be more successful than it was under Nixon, okay, or as it was under Reagan even. But it is what he's trying, and we have to kind of take that up and understand what it is. And people are calling him a neocon right now because he's talking about Mark Rubio as Secretary of State. And you know what? He probably is some sort of neocon, actually, Trump. I mean, he's a realist neocon. Maybe like in the old, like neocon is a term that's been watered down to just mean war hawk. But he may very well be a neocon. So what does that mean? How did it was originally disaffected Democrats and the Cold War liberals who became neoconservatives. So where does that put Trump if he's an old style neocon? We should think about it, not to embrace it, not to reject it, but to try to understand it for our own purposes. As soon as we have anything remotely like a base so that we can have actual political purposes. Right now, all we can do is cheerlead one side or another. But so we can't. Let's do neither, and let's try to think through what this moment is about. I'm sorry. I'm acting as if you don't. I'm lecturing you or hectoring. I'm not trying to do that.
What? No, I enjoyed it. And you can also enjoy being lectured and hectored at by joining us in the Parrot Room on Patreon. Go to www.patreon.com/dietsoap.
I have a clip of Richard Nixon I want to run in the Patreon and the Parrot Room. If you come in and sign up to our Patreon at $10 a month, you can join the stream. If you get in soon, in the weeks to come, I'm going to rearrange it so we can use Zoom and bring in more people to the group discussion. But it's a discussion. We'll be starting it at about 20 minutes from now. And thanks everybody for watching, and I hope to see you all next week, and where we will have even more Trumpy stuff to be deranged about.
In the case of nuclear or radiological